get some of those in. And with that, all that said, we are going to get the formal YouTube intro since this will be up on YouTube later. Cool,
Sweet.
cool. Awesome. All right. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you are doing well. And thank you for being here. We're live on Twitch right now. You're watching on YouTube later, and we are doing an exclusive interview with the one, the only producer and songwriter, Porter Robinson. How are you doing, man?
Doing great. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you coming through. New record, Nurture, out now. It's been out a little bit. Are you happy with the reception so far?
Man, I was actually floored by the reaction because I always felt that like with the singles that came out, I felt like the expectations were so high, and so I'm always like bracing myself for some kind of major backlash. And I think like there was some of that to some of the singles, but I felt like once the album came out, I really felt seen and understood. And I feel like that's the thing I'm always looking for the very most is like I hate feeling misunderstood. I hate feeling like I'm fine with people not liking what I do, but I want people to sort of get what I'm going for. And I really felt like people knew what I was trying to do with the album once it came out. And that was a really good feeling. Yeah.
What was that backlash initially that you may have been seeing? Just that the sound of these new tracks didn't really resemble that of Worlds or Virtual Self or something else?
Well, I think that people people have an instinctual reaction to music about whether they like it or don't like it, and then sort of tend to find a focal point to place the blame on, you know. And I think I think like music is something that can be analyzed, but I think most people's initial reaction to it is something kind of instinctual. So I would hear stuff about like, you know, the sound of the vocals or too much lyrics, and I always felt like that was maybe coming from folks who wanted a more drop driven kind of sound, a more instrumental driven sound. But it was still mostly positive. But, you know, I think every human being is wired this way. The couple things that you do see stick with you, you know? But no, I think it was mostly positive, but for whatever reason, I felt like I was really bracing for like a huge backlash on the album. And it was actually like, it was a great day for me. I always talk about how release days are like kind of can be like sort of unprocessable. It's just like too many voices coming at you, and it's not always a fun experience, but like the album release day was awesome for me. So I'm really happy people like it.
You may have said this before in an interview or somewhere else, but just to kind of get this down for this conversation, it has been such a long time since you have released Worlds. When exactly did you start the work on what would become this record? You know, like when did those kind of thematic and aesthetic ideas that obviously carry through the whole album start to come together and Nurture began to really become its own thing?
Well, it began to take shape actually right after Worlds came out. I had this sort of realization that it actually came after watching this movie called Wolf Children, which had the soundtrack done by Masakatsu Takagi, who's since become one of my all-time musical heroes. And I was so struck by the soundtrack in that movie, where I felt like it was so beautiful and so expressive and so emotional, but it felt up close. Like it felt like I could touch it. It felt like it was like so close to my face. And until then, I think a lot of my favorite music felt kind of vast and far away and epic and dreamlike. And I think it was almost like I had reached the saturation point for epicness in my own taste. And so I wanted to like learn how to write music that was beautiful in that way, that felt more intimate, and more personal. And so like I started Lifelike, which is the album's opener, and Something Comforting in 2015. And then after that came a long period of creative frustration and side projects and other things of that nature. But yeah, the very beginning of the idea was in 2015, which is why it's like, yeah, 7 years since the last record feels like a fair thing to say.
You know, it's interesting that you make that reference point, because I mean, there's lots of different ways to make a soundtrack. There are lots of different styles of soundtrack music out there, but there is something that seems very soundtrack inspired by some of the context and some of the compositions on the record. Was there anything else about that span in time that brought change to maybe your musical diet that would have impacted the sound of this project too?
Well, so this is a story that I've told many times. So to my own listeners, forgive me for repeating this. But around 2015, 2016, Worlds had come out, and like it I think my audience liked it. I was sort of expecting it to be polarizing, and I remember feeling like I was going to get back into the studio and like I had figured out what my thing was. I felt like I knew, like, okay, I did Worlds, it's well received. Like I know how to do this now. And I think there's a natural kind of ebb and flow that comes with creativity and inspiration and things like that. And I happened to hit one of the valleys, and I just completely overreacted to it. It just freaked me out. I was just like, oh my God, what if I can never make music again? And once that thought occurred to me, it was like I was going into the studio every day with the intention to disprove that idea. So that is incredibly infertile grounds for breeding creativity. Like going in with anxiety, trying to write music to prove something. For me, that's all really, really anti-creative. I think I write my best music when I'm like exploring an instrument that I've never tried before, or trying a musical style I've never even considered, or trying to actively make something I hate. Like that's when I am able to it ceases to feel like a reflection of my own abilities. So your ego kind of gets divorced from it. And that's when I'm able to really have fun. So this is a very long-winded way of saying like that I was really stuck. I was really uninspired. And then the second major mistake that I made was that I thought I needed to put more pressure on myself. I thought that I wasn't working hard enough. And I didn't realize that at the time, but the true antidote for me was going to be going out and like living real life, listening to new music, watching movies, like falling in love, traveling, like having actual things to write about. But it was like I was like very much running on empty and spinning my wheels and demanding something of myself, when there was like I talk about creativity as being like life experiences are like, it's like these raw materials that you collect and bring in to your own world, and you don't know how much of it you're going to use, and some of it's like manure, but like creativity can grow out of it. You just need to have stuff to be thinking about and digesting. And like all I had was my own self in the studio making nothing. So yeah, that's what like much of, especially 2016, late 2015, 2016, early 2017 was a lot of like being scared I wasn't going to be able to do music anymore, for sure.
Yeah, you can totally crush yourself. You can totally crush your spirit if you're just kind of feeding into this endless loop of just self-referencing, or just making your process only about your process, and that's it. And if you continue down that road and you really want to shoot for the stars or do something different, you'll find yourself in a position where you're either stuck in a rut, or you're just kind of like approaching art like an assembly line and just doing the same thing over and over and over. And that's when you were about to throw in what you were going to say.
Well, one interesting thing about it is that like so much of this album is about music, and it's about making music, and it's about creativity. And
when I was like your struggle with that process of kind of breaking through.
Yeah. And when I was at the lowest point, trying to address that through lyrics was something completely inaccessible to me. It was like I tried to write songs about being stuck, and it was just, I could not tolerate it. I just remember writing stuff and being like, this is so annoying. Like I just remembered like I couldn't talk about it. And it was like once I almost like released that tense grip I had on my own idea of what making music meant and creativity. And like, I remember my manager and girlfriend being like, let's like, you need to go on a trip. Like you need to get out of your studio. And I remember being like, how is this going to help? Like, how is not writing music going to help? My thinking was very distorted around all of this. And, it was like once I was in a place that was healthier and where I had like a much more reasonable relationship with music making, that suddenly once I could talk about the struggle that I was facing, and really like half the lyrics of the album are like an internal voice that I had, like a thought that passed through my mind that felt really kind of incisive or painful or cutting. I would write it down and be like, oh, that's so succinct. Like this says my worst case scenario in as few words as possible. Let's see if I can make that a lyric. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the lyrics of the album are like the most cutting, incisive, kind of mean thing I could say to myself, and then like the antidote to that in the next line. And so, yeah, a lot of it is like this internal dialogue. And I was eventually able to get to a place where I could talk about these subjects. And then it was like it all started bursting forth.
Hmm. Um, this might seem just like an obvious answer, but it's something that I wanted to ask about just because it is kind of a notable change on the record. But the story that you're talking about and wanting to get it out in the music, did that kind of lead your decision to take on more vocal duties and just kind of make sure it was you kind of getting that story across on the record ultimately?
Well, it was sort of like the opposite. It was like maybe part of the reason I got stuck is because I knew I wanted to say something and I knew I wanted to sing. And it seems so naive and silly now, but like the truth is, like 4 years ago when I first began this record, I was not experienced as a person, like as a songwriter, as someone who writes choruses. I was mostly writing instrumental music with the occasional vocal on it or like feature. But for some reason, I thought I could just like turn on the tap and write songs in the same way that my own favorite songwriters do. And I just had to get better at it. It took like so much of the album was written in the last 2 years because like I think I came into my own in terms of lyrical style and how I wanted to approach choruses and song structures. So there was also just practice to be done,
Hmm.
truly.
What were some of those, I guess, pitfalls or learning curves when you were kind of transitioning from the types of songs that you were writing, whether it be on Worlds or like an early EP or something, to this? Like, what was it that you tried to do that you found that you didn't really have the tools to do? Like, what is it about writing a chorus that you feel like you needed to learn that you didn't have the knowledge of?
It's just a different skill set. Like I feel like I could bust out three instrumental world style hooks right now if I wanted to. But like learning how a chorus flows in a way that's different structurally to a verse. Like the verses tend to have a particular style of rhythm and a particular cadence, a particular length, and choruses tend to be generally like a bit higher than the verses and based around these shorter loops and simpler words. And like I didn't realize that like choruses usually have the central sentiment of the song is the chorus and the verse is different contexts on it. Like all these things are just like I could read like a WikiHow article on how to write a chorus, and believe me, I did. I was Googling the entire time, like, how do I do music? And like, it was a funny experience to like be looking for advice somewhere and stumble on a Reddit thread where people were referencing my music as an example on how to do something. I'm like, no one can help me. Like they're referencing my own music on how to do this. I'm so lost.
Hmm.
But yeah, like it just takes practice. Like it's so boring. It's so excruciatingly boring to say that, but I just needed to like grind it and sort of learn how to do it.
It's interesting to hear you say that because often I do, um, think and wonder about the quality of albums that, come out of something like the EDM scene, which, as much as aesthetically you have changed on this record, there's still, I think, a lot of deep ties to that style of music and a lot of what
Mm-hmm.
you're doing on Nurture.
Mm-hmm.
And, thinking of that and obviously the Discovery comparison that I made to the record on
Which,
the
thank
review.
you. Oh my God. I
Well,
was,
I mean, I wholeheartedly mean it, but still, like thinking of this record and thinking of that record, I do sort of think like, why in electronic music generally, and especially like, kind of like the EDM echelon, are there not more records that are like, more song based in the tradition that you're talking about, or even like kind of thematic and conceptual from an
mm,
emotional standpoint? And that's not to, sort of take down the efforts of anybody who does happen to create in that style. It's just that, there sort of seems to be a separation between that, and if you take something like rock music, and again, not to assert rock music as superior or anything, but there's like any number of like concept rock albums, or like
Hmm.
the breakup album is like such a
Hmm.
stereotype in the genre at this point.
Right.
And you're going through your own emotional experience, but
Hmm.
do you think that's also kind of like a learning curve that others who produce music in that scene have not kind of overcome either, because you have to kind of like get down with the basics of like chorus, delivering
Yeah.
emotional sentiments on songs in a
Hmm.
certain way?
Yeah. I think that like the for an artist to be the person who like produces the entire instrumental and has enough production chops, has their like however many years of doing that, and also to be the person writing it and to be the person singing it, it's just like a lot of disparate skill sets that all have to come together.
Hmm.
And that it's just hard. It's like I think a lot of rock bands had the benefit of producers who were able to. I mean, I think that's why this album took so long, is because I was wearing so many hats and in so many different roles. But also, I think that it may have to do with that there is, and I say this with love for club music and for dance music. There's a certain kind of functional element, I think, to dance music where that you're kind of constrained by structure a lot of the time, where it just the dance floor is a can be a very practical place, um, and like and of course there's electronic music that breaks away from the tropes and oftentimes to like incredible effect. But I just think that like that that a lot of dance music is being written with a different goal in mind
Hmm.
than what I had. Like
Yeah, there's
I
something to be
was,
said for the fact that that style of music has a totally different skill set that
mhm,
most folk singer songwriters would never be able to adapt to.
mhm. Yeah, it's something that's really, I'm so glad that at the moment I started wanting to write like songs, I had 10 years of experience of being a producer and mixing and all of these things under my belt. Because I could make it exactly to my vision. But then, the trade-off for that is that if you experience a good deal of perfectionism or whatever, there's so many spots to get hung up on. So like it's like once I've finished obsessing over that final verse, I'm then obsessing over, is it better with the kick drum 1 decibel louder or 1 decibel quieter, and like exporting it over and over, going to the car, listening, coming back. And it's like usually that's delegated to a few different people, but I'm not complaining. I mean, it's like I feel so lucky that I'm able to do all those things. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I do think that there's this generation of newer electronic music producers. I feel like especially right now with you, when you hear like what's coming up on SoundCloud and things like that, there are so many young artists who want to do that. They sort of cut their teeth producing dance music, and they want to sing now. And I'm like, that's amazing, because you can present a fully completed, uncompromised vision. So it's like I feel like it's a sort of new school way of doing things, but I think it's for the better.
Talking about a little bit more some of the themes specifically on certain tracks. I mean, obviously the record as a whole like explores almost what seems to be like this falling out and then falling in again with the love of being a musician, and also
Mhm.
just I guess this struggle of like finding a sound and finding an emotional concept that you want to express in your own work, and then just like overcoming the hurdles to get to that point where you feel comfortable doing that, or you feel able to do that. But also on tracks like Look at the Sky, like while that's also addressed to a degree, there also seem to be themes of like general existentialism. Are there moments on this record where you're just like kind of coming to terms with even just wanting to be alive and just kind of just function as a person and just like enjoy life and just kind of enjoy the world that you're existing in? It seems like there are elements here that are more than just about being a musician, but just like
That's true.
coming to terms with just loving yourself and
Mhm.
leading the kind of life that you want to lead outside of music too.
Yeah, it's. I mean, one of the first things that sort of entered into my perspective around this album was like, if Worlds was about paying homage to these fantasy landscapes, like I wanted to find something kind of beautiful about reality for this album. And so it was like, what's something that's that's beautiful and real. Like I started getting into ideas like mindfulness, but also, yeah, I mean, there were points where I was like, damn, like what is the point of all this stuff? And it's something that I feel myself hesitating to talk about because it's so many people's dreams to like stand up on the big stage and to feel successful and stuff like that. But there were points where I was like, I feel like I did that and I still feel pretty unfulfilled. And so like I think a lot of people's compass, the thing that is moving them forward in life is this idea of succeeding, of growing, of getting better, of getting like, especially with music, like what do? You try to get bigger. And I felt like I was being confronted with the full reality of that. I was like, damn, I actually hate the fact that at any given moment I can look on Twitter and someone's saying something about me. Like that actually kind of sucks. And like, and you know, that it's a small price to pay, I guess, in some respects. But I remember feeling like, what is it that I actually want? And what is it that I am actually trying to do here in life generally? And so when there were moments where I felt like I just absolutely could not do the thing I was trying to do, which was make music, and I wasn't even sure if I wanted the thing I was going for, I felt really, really lost. And yeah, I mean, and just to talk about like death more directly, like a song like Blossom is, it's more or less about like falling in love and being confronted by your own mortality through that lens. Like it's one thing to be a high school and say, I'm not scared of dying. But then when you're truly in love and you come to realize how there's no guarantee of the time that you'll get to spend together with that person beyond the reality that we know, then you know that death is coming. It's like it's about being so in love that you become afraid to die for the first time. And yeah, I think a song like Mother is also it's mostly about grief. It's mostly about like I had this obsession where I didn't want to move out of my house, my childhood home, because I kind of came to realize that like this is so weird. This is so like this is statistical here, but this thought kind of plagued me. I was like, if I move out of my house, then 99.999% of the time I've ever spent with my family, whom I love, will be over. Like I'll still see them at holidays, but that's a fraction of the time that I would spend with them. It was like the idea of moving out to me was this way of representing like the grief of growing up and of mortality and all these things. And like, you know, I think when I'm writing lyrics and when I'm writing music, I'm trying to find that line that gives me that like kick in the balls. Like I'm trying to write a line that makes me feel like, oh shit. And that like makes me feel the full weight of the whatever the thing I'm talking about is. And so yeah, a song like Mother, a song like Blossom, and Sweet Time to an extent as well. It was me like trying to reckon with mortality and with death and look at the sky too. Yeah, I'll be alive next year. I remember writing that line and being like, can you say this in a pop song? And then I couldn't get away from it.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, existentialism and also just giving yourself purpose. It's interesting how a lot of what you say is it orbits around being a musician, but then there are elements of it that you know but it's not literally about being a musician. It's like that's just kind of the abstract that you're
Mm-hmm.
working through,
Right,
and
right.
you know, it's like you're kind of coming to terms with, well, even a little bit here, um, you know, even if it's sort of funny because of just I'm sure, you know, not to get annoying with it, but just like because of our capitalist society, you know, there is sort of a lot of fetishization of work and
Mm,
especially cool work. Like as soon as you find work that's really cool, all of a sudden like your life is great and all your problems are solved and so on and so forth. And as you were saying, like, you're doing cool work. You're doing something that, should be really impressive and, millions of people are aware of and think is just really neat, but you're coming away from it feeling unfulfilled. And that's when that's when you realize that you need things outside of work, no matter what that work is, to actually to actually make life worth living.
For sure. I definitely have that toxic relationship with productivity, for sure. It has a huge bearing on my happiness. Like, I remember when I wrote that initial hook for Musician, which was the chopped up KKB sample, I was like over the moon for 10 days. Like, I would, like, just having that, I was so amped. And like, I would also remember days where I would feel like I started an idea that was showing a lot of promise, and then it would kind of peter out, or I would lose my enthusiasm for it, and I would just be like feeling terrible. And it's like, it would be so awesome if I could care a little less about this, I think. And I think that's part of the work that I did on the album. I was like, I think part of the reason I'm like hugging the ground on the album cover is because it's like, if I needed to find a way to love other aspects of reality and to love life on Earth and everything about my direct sensory experience in order to have a healthy relationship with the music too. Because like, the worst place I was when I felt like I had nothing going on outside of the music. And so when the music didn't come, I felt totally empty. And I think now I'm able to just like sit back and make something terrible. I made a horrible drill beat this morning. I want to make a great drill beat. I want to make an awesome drill beat. And I made a bad one this morning. And
eventually rap on it, obviously.
Yeah. I've been joking in every interview about how the next step for me is to start rapping. Yeah, I made a bad drill beat this morning, and I was I'm proud to announce I'm okay. I'm okay with it. No, I mean, that probably wouldn't have bummed me out too much in the past, but like, I just like, it's and it's funny how much of my interviews turn into this public therapy session, but I do think it's helpful for people to hear, even if you're not a musician. I remember I've mentioned this before, but I remember the Justin Vernon interview that he did with Zane Lowe around the album I, I. The fact that he talked about being on the floor of his bathroom and being like, I don't know what's happening to me, and talking about going on SSRIs for a time, was enormously helpful to me. I was like, oh, like one of my heroes is going through something similar. And like, I'm not doomed in that way. So that's why I feel like it's worthwhile for me to talk about this, even though I do find it a little embarrassing how these conversations tend to go, where I'm like, I am talking about music after all, but it did have a really big bearing on my own sense of self-worth and whether or not I felt like I was worth anything. So
I think the more open people are about these situations, the better. I mean, I just did a video the other day on the Fantano channel, I think yesterday, where I was just reacting to this very odd cry for help that somebody had posted about, like, I woke up today and I'm a musician and I listened to all my favorite music and it all sounded terrible. Everything that I listened to, it sounded like children playing it and just making random noise and so on and so forth. And I'm afraid I'm going to hate music forever. And, I just tried to like address that and just, say it's, just give it time. It's not a big deal. Give yourself space. And there were like thousands or just rather hundreds of comments just being like, yeah, that happened to me. Just like literally music detox, man. Or, just like, so give yourself a break, give yourself some space, I
think it's good advice. I feel bad for the person who experienced that too. Cause I think that's a very anxious person who's probably disposed pretty similarly to me. If that person is watching or listening or sees this, like I've had the same thing too. And it's, it's fine. It goes away.
Yeah. I feel like there's, inadvertently like a really weird, pressure that goes on maybe with some music fans as a result of just like how robust and how active the music community is and
Mm.
how people like me may be with just like, constantly reviewing, constantly suggesting, constantly recommending. And there, for a lot of people, maybe there's this feeling of just like constantly always having to keep up and just like be listening to everything and digesting everything and processing everything. And it's like you don't have to put yourself through that. Like if you're just a casual fan, if you're just a casual listener, or even just a musician who's doing their own thing, it's like it's not necessary. Like don't turn it into a job unless it's literally your job. I mean, I get the question often where people ask me like, oh, do you get tired of music? Do you get sick of music? Is there a point where you just don't want to hear music? And I suppose it happens, but it's rare. But I mean, I'm a little bit of a special case. I hyper focus on it.
Mm.
And so, just stimulation wise, my brain is always just into it,
Mm. Yeah.
now that's at the detriment of not being able to focus as well on other things,
Yeah,
so
that's something that I wanted to ask you about because like I find that when I listen to music, like it's like I almost feel like there's an act of charity in which artists you and you meaning anyone like give three listens to, because just merely the repeat exposure effect, we like things more usually the more we listen to them. And I feel like as somebody who is so prolific and listens to so much music, it has to be hard to know what to pour your time and attention into, to get to like I always think about that, like how do you know once you know how you feel about something, when are you sure?
yeah, it's a very, I guess, odd process at this point, and it's
Mm.
difficult to, I guess, sort of explain because I feel like with the practice and sort of just constant effort that I've been putting in for so long, I sort of come to what I really want to say and get across in reviews very quickly.
Mm.
I feel like in the past there were maybe certain artists or genres that I needed to acclimate myself to better in order to,
Mm.
get my point across. And there are obviously still things that I shy away from reviewing for the most part. Like, I have a difficult time really kind of getting across thoughts on soundtracks because they're not meant to be listened to like albums anyway.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm usually kind of listening for a certain type of experience with an album,
Hmm.
not one that can be easily put into words.
Yeah.
But soundtracks so like totally subvert that because they're their purpose is for something else.
Right. Right.
So there's that, and I'm not like the biggest classical buff in the world either. So sometimes I'm not equipped enough to really talk about that.
Hmm.
Except for maybe like some, modern and postmodern, composers and artists or
Hmm.
other artists who, infuse classical elements into their
Yeah.
stuff.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's a process to it that is sort of a mix of just like years of having listened to so many different things and having at least a tiny bit of a pulse on different music styles and
Yeah.
scenes combined with just like what my audience is demanding of me week to week. Just like, oh,
That's interesting. Yeah.
you've got to review the Porter Robinson, da 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 da
Hey,
da.
thanks, Fantano's audience. I appreciate that.
I mean,
Yeah.
I probably, I most definitely would have listened to it regardless, just out of
Mm.
like the curiosity because, the world's, regardless of my feelings on it, has like held
Let's
up.
go. Let's talk
Has
about it.
we
Let's put it
can
out. Let's put it all
we
out in the
can,
open.
but it has held up like a very passionate audience and following.
Yeah.
The record, in comparison with many albums to come out of that scene, has an incredible amount of longevity to it. And I guess before we get into exactly that, to what would you, even though you said earlier in the interview, you were kind of like transitioning away from that style of production and songwriting, and there were certain things that you needed to learn about songwriting on
Hmm.
Nurture, which I presume in some respects that you're, happy that you learned those skills, and you
Yeah.
feel like this record has kind of brought you to a new level, having accomplished that. But still, what do you think it is about that album? For that particular scene that has made it have the longevity that
Hmm.
that it has so far.
Right. Well, I've been able to think about this like a lot, obviously. Like I've thought about World so much, and there were moments, I did another project in 2017, 2018, which was actually instrumental to helping me break some of the dry spell, which is called Virtual Self, which was
Yeah.
a, turn of the millennium, very Bimani rhythm games driven project. And I remember at the time, like there were some people who were upset that I didn't want to play world's music during the Virtual Self shows, which, in retrospect, it just seems like unfathomable to me. Like I felt like they were so distinct from each other. So I've had some time to think about like what it is about worlds, and I can talk about what aspects of that like I really love and that I like have that are still really really meaningful to me. I remember when I first started playing around with the idea of using these sort of like N64 sound font style instrumentations of like Ocarina of Time sound and um and combining those things with like Vocaloid, I felt like I had this like palette of sort of novel references to fiction, to like games, and I was so excited too about like about like I was very very excited about churches at that time and Passion Pit and all these things have been like discussed amply, and I was like I felt like the angle that I had on it was taking some of that like indie music sound and incorporating this sort of EDM and video game soundtrack worldview into it. And it's like, so I watched the Nurture review, and I was like I was thinking a lot about how you see worlds and how you continue to see it, and like I feel like you and I may actually agree on which elements of that album like are not my favorite. Like the song Lionhearted is probably the one that makes the most use of the like gang vocal idea. And
Don't tell anybody that I have a point. Don't do that.
No,
You're going to create a weird paradox here where it's
yeah,
like people are going to know who to listen to. People are
yeah.
going to know who to believe. It's going to be like a time
Well,
warp.
it's like not even something I need to admit though, because like I stopped playing Lionhearted so long ago, and I think the moments of worlds that are really special are like the Goodbye to a World, Sad Machine, Divinity, the ones that didn't lean so much on the like indie sound and fully embrace this fusion between the sort of video game soundtracky stuff and the dance music stuff. That's where I feel like the magic of that album really was.
Mm.
And it's like I think that's what the fans honed in on. That's what I've always played in the shows. And then when I developed out the live show, which was Worlds Live, it was so hyper focused and expanded on that idea. And I think that's a lot of what people fell in love with too, was the live version of the show, where I felt like I doubled down on the elements of that album that were really good. But I'm somebody who's like, I'm so self-critical, I'm so self-conscious that it's like, people could come at my music with anything and I'd be like, oh God, they're right. And like the gang vocals thing, and like that particular sound is something that I have like, I think maybe by 2015 I was already being like, oh, like I was hesitating and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's like when I listen to Worlds nowadays, I'm like, I remember exactly what I wanted to express, and that during that time, I wanted to express that feeling of that sort of nostalgia and the feeling of the ways that memories become inaccessible and how you can't really go home to them. One of the main inspirations behind that record too was the the feeling that came with these virtual worlds like MMORPGs shutting down, and your whole friends list is gone, and you have these communities that just disappear overnight because the game is no longer profitable. I remember feeling like at age 18, like I experienced like with games like City of Heroes and Star Wars Galaxies, like it's like you saw the end of the world happening right in front of you, and you had all these friendships that just evaporated, and it was like felt so ripe for art to me, to talk about that. So like, the world's heads, they know what's up with that. They do. And ultimately I'm really happy that people still love that record, because I think when I listen to it nowadays, I feel the same thing that they do. I think we see it in the same way. Me and y'all.
Are to your point, R.I.P. Club Penguin.
Mm-hmm.
But generally though, do you think I was too harsh on the record? You've been nice. You could beat me up a little bit too.
Here's my big problem with the World's review is that
give me the biggest problem.
Honestly, this is kind of sad, because it's again me being down on myself. But I feel like I remember in the World's review, you said, like, almost like as a way to try to be fair, you're like, now to be fair, like some of Robinson's older work, like Spitfire, was pretty cool in XYZ way. I was like, Worlds is so much better than Spitfire. Like, why are you praising Spitfire to seem fair in your criticism to Worlds? Like dude, it, that was the only part of it that stuck with me. I was like, dude, you need to listen to Spitfire again. That is not as good as you think it is.
I guess it's just to make the point that like, and this is sort of more of like a knee-jerk reaction to things that I know my audience will say or suppose or something like that. And that's that because I don't like one work from an artist, it means I don't like them at all. And I would never give anything that they would ever do a chance, or I would never see any legitimacy in any music that they do.
Right.
And, you know, which is funny, which even happens when, you know, it's which even happens with artists like Kendrick Lamar. I just saw somebody online today, you know, as you were kind of talking about. People are always talking about you. You know, I am personally very excited for the prospect of a new Kendrick album, and you know, I think I said as much on Twitter, and you know, at least one of the responses seemed like really bitter and was like, "Why? So you could give him a negative review?" And it's like, dude. Every Kendrick review I've ever given is positive. I've literally given the man album of the decade. I've given him a 10. I've given him a 9. I've given him an 8. Like like I just don't like as much as some people his last project. But you know, again,
dude, I've thought about this a lot. I've thought about how, like, I've tried to put myself in your shoes before. And like over the last few years, like, because it, you know, it crosses your mind when you're making an album, like what are critics going to say? And I've thought about it so much when I was like, you know, getting in my feelings about it. And I was like, I thought so much about how like you didn't ask to be as prominent as you are. Like I've thought about this a lot, about how like you began, as far as I understand, as somebody just kind of putting your opinion online and scoring music. And like before long, your first impressions on people's albums has a huge impact on some people's feelings about it. And it's like, when I was having moments, I was like, is this good for the world? Like, is this helpful? There were also moments where I was like,
the jury's still out on that.
well, it's like, I can't fault you because you were just putting, and it's at the bottom of every video, you know, this is just my opinion, right? Like you're just putting your thoughts out on there, and it happened to become really influential. And it's like, that's a tough position to be in. I've thought about it. I have, just by telling the truth about what you think about something, you piss a lot of people off. And like, that is, you have to have thick skin, I think, in order to be able to do that. Because there were times when I was mad at you, Fantano, and I think everyone's felt that way.
I apologize. I want to humbly apologize to you in this interview for any time that I made you mad or you were angry or anything.
Yeah.
But you know, as much as I preface certain things, and even what I said, you know, with Spitfire, you know, it's because, again, it's sort of a paradox. It doesn't matter how much I like something or how much I respect somebody or how many positive reviews I've given any one artist or any band. The moment you don't like one record or a record that people perceive to be the record, you know, the moment you don't like that, you're a hater. And there's no nuance. There's no discussion further than that point. You become the hater of that guy. And, you know, look, I will accept that there are some acts and artists out there that I do like hate their shit. Like it's like there are some acts and artists out there it's just like one negative review after another. I will admit that. I will admit that. But like, you know, don't throw me totally into the trash. I mean, if you want to.
Yeah.
But don't throw me totally into the trash over like, you know, a 7. You know, it's like, especially when it's somebody who I've reviewed them 4 or 5 times, where they have a long and storied career of like classic albums. And, you know, I've loved all of their stuff up until the point where I was like, it's pretty good. You know, it's okay. I'm not blown away by it.
Well, I mean, I think the broadest point that I want to come to is just like, a few months ago, like when the idea of us having this conversation, when that came across my table, and I don't know where that came from. I don't know if it was
Yeah,
from my team.
it's funny. We had there was sort of like a very preliminary agreement to have a conversation at some point, like, yeah, like well over maybe a month or 2 months before I had even heard the record. So, I just thought the prospect of us having a conversation, regardless of whether or not I enjoyed
Yeah.
Nurture, would just be interesting, just based off of like, the fact that there's so much polarizing,
Yeah, there's a
opinions
history
over.
for sure. There's
Yeah.
definitely a Fantano Robinson history, and also just the idea of a conversation between the two of us. Like, I feel like you could sell tickets for it. It feels like such a cage match waiting to happen. Uh,
Fuck, man. We should
yeah,
we should have done that and split
yeah,
it.
seriously, pay-per-view. That would have been the move. But like, I thought about it, and I was really close to saying no because I was scared. I was like, I like I've thought about what you do so much, and I've thought about that review so much, and I've also I spent so much time with Nurture thinking about like, how is this album going to be received? Like, what's the worst thing someone could say about this? And I was like, this idea terrifies me, so I have to do this. Like regardless of what he gives the record, I
You
really
know what
really
you
want
know
to.
what it is. I'm just thinking of this again. This is PR people are so tricky, just tricky
Mm,
PR people. Because I believe it was Reed that reached out to me, just sort of like out of the blue. Hey,
mm,
new Porter record's going to be on the way, so on and so forth. Would you want to talk to him? And I was like, why would Porter want to talk to me? I thought he and all of his fans are probably under the impression that I hate him. I had the same situation with Mike Shinoda recently, because a PR person for him reached out to have a conversation. I was like, why does Mike Shinoda want to talk to me? We were just like kind of sitting there like live on Twitch being like, why am I going to talk to this person? Why does this person want to talk to me? It's just a
yeah.
PR paradox
Mm.
that I'm just constantly getting caught in. It's a trap.
I'm glad I know that now. I didn't know if it came from you or if it came from my team. It came to my management to me as like an offer, and I was like, what? And then I was like, actually, this could be really really productive. And I think that was when I started thinking a lot about like trying to put myself in your shoes and like, what would it be like to be a guy who was just putting music reviews on YouTube, and then suddenly you're kind of the biggest music critic in the world. Like, what is that? What pressures come with that? And like I earlier today I was looking at your tweets, and I was like, there is an incessant shitstorm flying at you too. And so like, yeah, it's like, I think for artists it can really be like, you know we like put so many hours into this thing. How can you just evaluate it? How can you just give it a number? But then I also think about it as like, well, he was just a guy doing this, and then it became really huge. It's not like you were anointed. You know what I mean? And so
I'm
that
definitely not an industry plant.
yeah, yeah. So is there such thing as an industry plant? Is this a real thing? I
Lord,
see this term.
that is a can of worms that I don't even want to get into. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, look, it's like, short answer, yes, but long answer is the conversational meta around it is so overblown,
Hmm.
and there's so many like weird conspiratorial accusations. The industry plant conversation, for the most part, has just replaced kind of the Illuminati conversation. It's the
Right.
same conversation. It's
Hmm.
just that it's less like it's more just the labels are putting the person there to seem
Hmm.
like really DIY and organic and blowing them up behind the
Okay.
scenes, and
So
less like,
it's like fake authenticity on a major label.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, okay, I see.
exactly,
Dude,
exactly. I mean, the even the latest kind of conversation around like industry plants, this trio from TikTok that I won't continue to drag their name through the mud. Even they aren't technically like industry plants, because sure, they're kind of bad at marketing, but there's no like person behind the scenes pulling all the strings and so on and so forth to like
Mhm.
force something. I
Right.
mean, I think if people really kind of understood how the music industry works these days, like they would know that, look, a lot of these labels and a lot of these PR people are looking for somebody who's already kind of like built a little bit of an organic something on
Right.
the internet.
which is
It's
not
like,
as hard to do as it once was. Yeah.
yeah, and the thing
Yeah.
is, well, it could be hard it could be hard to do if you're starting with nothing, and you as the PR person or the A&R person don't know where to start.
Right.
But if somebody's already laid that groundwork for you,
Mhm.
all you really need to do, or what a lot of labels are doing, is just coming in and just like pouring water on it. Just like, okay,
Mm.
we're gonna make it rain on this, and
Right.
hopefully the extra attention kind of blows it up. But
I feel like people can be manipulated, but only to a certain extent. Like
yeah,
I feel like it's hard to have a triple A massive success, like Billie Eilish level success story if you're an industry plant. Like I think that ultimately success at that level has to just come from like love. I feel like that's what it is. I think it's when something really, really resonates on a cultural level. And like, I think that people, conspiracy theorists in general, just tend to think that like everyone at every level is more competent than they actually are. Like if
sure.
you actually deal with the major label system and you're inside it, like you see how many things go astray and how many things get forgotten and how many huge mistakes are made on obvious things. You're like, these people, like no one is capable of very few people are capable of true conspiracies. But I remember watching this video in like 2012 of this YouTube video of someone analyzing why I Porter was in the Illuminati and
Holy
being on the
shit.
yeah, right, big scoop here. Being on the other end of a conspiracy theory is one of the like strangest experiences, and it's like it's so frustrating but so hilarious too. Like they were looking at my live visuals and like I had like an eyeball and a triangle in there. Fuck me, right?
Of
My bad.
course, yeah, fucked
And
up.
but it was just like it was like in a series of flashing images, and they like paused it. And I think that I think the person was very very lost, and so they have my compassion in that sense. But just like if I there's no way for me to like the temptation is so strong for me to get in contact with that person and be like, dude, I live with my mom.
Right.
Like at that point, I was like, I live with my mom. Like I literally just play video games all day and watch
Mm.
anime. Like I don't know what to tell you. Like I don't know what to say. And
As bad as that is, though, if we could turn the dial back on anything in the
yeah.
modern music scene, it's really, I wish we could go back before a time before the industry plant conversation and just go back to the Illuminati, because honestly, like, I've seen some artists' reputations get like totally torn apart by the industry plant accusations, whereas like the Illuminati stuff only seems to spread so far. Plus I love the photoshops, I love the pictures where it's just like MS Paint and you see the triangles highlighted and just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the really bad like bright yellow and bright red text over like a
Yeah.
black background. It's
Right.
just like, it's a real aesthetic, man. I
It's
actually
interesting.
wish,
Yeah, it was like proto YouTube thumbnails in a weird
yeah,
way.
I
Like
actually
with the red
like,
circles and
there's got to be some like musician out there at some point who just like totally just borrows from that vibe
mhm.
and just like totally just repurposes it into album art. Don't get any ideas here,
No,
buddy. Like
I saw something. I saw there's some musician. I think they're like in the like wave scene or something
Mm,
like that. But there's someone. God, I can't remember who it is. But all of their album art and all of their YouTube art are like insane clickbait. They're styling their art after clickbait, and they're styling their song titles after clickbait, and it was actually really vibey. I remember
mm.
seeing it and being like, wait, this is kind of cool. Like this caught my attention. So I mean, it's cool because it's like that's an aesthetic, but it's also really practical. Get the YouTube numbers up, you know what I mean?
No, it's a good idea. All
Yeah.
right, I'm going to grab a few viewer questions, but first I'm going to continue to take advantage of the fact that this conversation is going well, and just go back to a couple of things really quickly that I thought would be interesting to
Yeah.
address, specifically in regards to the track musician.
Mm.
Some of what you talk about on that song, like these ideas of like growing up, getting a job, maybe like moving on from this musician thing. The feeling that I get from this track, with some of the ideas that you're discussing here of I guess like a perceived like arrested development
Mm.
on account of deciding to take this path as a career. Was this album also a part of like overcoming that, or is that still something that like you wrestle with a little bit?
Yeah, I think I still wrestle with everything that's discussed on the album, but like musician is a very like I feel like it's the most immature song on the album in the best way. Like I think everything else on the record is very concerned with this question of like, am I going to be able to do this? So much of the album is really introspective, and musician is just like, fuck you, I'm famous, I'm like, I'm making like big songs. Like that was the feeling I tried to tap into. And of course my lyrical habits seep through, and it's still like, it's still introspective, and it's still like, I'm still looking at myself in this meta way. But like the chorus where it's like, it's calling, I just can't stop, I'm sorry, is this like very unrestrained feeling to me, where it's like, I don't know, to me it's that feeling of when I am starting on a musical idea and I think it's going to be awesome, and I see the potential, and I see the promise that's shown by the initial idea. I just want to live in that world. Like I remember when I first chopped up that sample for Musician and made that intro hook, I was like, I wasn't seeing a music sequencer. I was like hallucinating, like the experience of being like in Kuala Lumpur and playing to an arena, or like that's how I was feeling. It was like I felt so huge and so inspired, and like I feel like I could take up as much space as I needed. And yeah, like that song is like, that's the place that I want to be when I write music. I want to be in that place of absolute shamelessness.
Hmm.
That's where I feel like I write my best music.
But I guess like my question from there is like, why is there any, I guess, shame associated with it in the first place? I mean, obviously there are societal pressures that we could talk about here, and maybe that's what we're going to get into as a result of this question. But like, just, speaking of the obligations that are expected of you and, our capitalist economic hierarchy, I presume as a result of your job and what you do, like, your life is stable, your bills are paid, you're handling your adulting business. As long as you're doing all of that, what does it matter if, all of that is coming as a result of being a musician by trade?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I need to think about it. I don't have a like with yeah, that get a job line where I'm saying, isn't it time you get a job? Like, isn't it time you grow up? I guess it's a great question. Um, I think maybe I just associate the idea of dreaming and having these huge aspirations and of wanting to be a rock star. It all feels a little childlike to me. It feels a
Hmm.
little teenage. And like I'm like 28 now.
Hmm.
And my when I think about the idea of singing out that chorus to 15,000 people and having them scream it back to me, I'm like, why would I ever want anything else?
Sure.
But at the same time, I remember moments where I was like loved ones, when I was like, I would be in a really, really bad spot, like, just at the very lowest point in a depressive spiral, and just saying things that were like, where I thought I needed to stop trying to make music, or just being like, I'm never going to be able to do that. When you're like catastrophizing, and you're just like, I'm a really, really emotional person. Like when I was catastrophizing, I remember somebody who I love and who loves me, and it's not my girlfriend Rika, just so no one's speculating, saying to me like, you don't have to do this. Like this is seems like trying to do music is making you really miserable. Like you don't, you're young, you don't have to do this. And it was said from a place of love, but it actually fucking terrified me, because I was like, my worst case scenario was that I was going to have to quit music because I couldn't do it anymore. Like it was said out of compassion to be like, you're so worked up about this, you don't have to do this. But to me it was like, oh my god, now the outside world is beginning to tell me that I have to quit. Like now people are starting to pick up on the fact that I can't do this anymore. So that's where that line came from. It was like, it was more about like fearing that people would tell me that it's time for me to move on from this music thing.
Hmm. I mean, I'm glad that when you did hear that, it was said from a place of caring as opposed to a place of, I don't know, trying to attack you or something. Because,
Mm-hmm.
as I was saying earlier, like once those obligations are finalized and you're
Mm-hmm.
doing what you need to do to handle your business, uh, I feel like if people take issue with what you are doing or what anybody is doing in terms of like, you need to get a job, beyond that point, like all they're really asking from you past that is for conformity,
Mm.
because they're just mad or for whatever reason unhappy that you're not sort of like, through no fault of anybody other than just like we live in a hell world, that that you're not caught into the same sort of like spiral that they are,
Mm,
and which I don't fault anybody for necessarily, because misery loves company.
yeah, yeah.
It's just sort of a mindset that I can't be upset that people sort of fall into, just because it's a
Hmm.
trap that people are 99% of the time, just like meant to fall into.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
but
I also really wanted to include that too. Once I came up with that line, I remembered feeling like there were going to be a lot of people who are trying to make a job out of doing music. And I
Sure.
know in my soul that musicians making music is worthwhile. And I know that seems like an incredibly obvious and maybe stupid thing to say, but there were times where I was thinking about it where I was like, is this an entirely selfish pursuit? Like, is this actually helping anybody? Is it, am I adding to the world? I mean, no question was off the table for me when I was at the brink. You know what I mean? I think anyone who's been there can understand that. Um, and I really had to convince myself that like me making music and doing it at the highest level that I possibly could, and for as many people as I could, was something helpful. And I talk about that a little bit in Get Your Wish. Like the central lyric of Get Your Wish is, tell me how it felt when you walked on water. Did you get your wish? And what that means to me, again, that's kind of going back to that point of me saying, I know what it's like to be kind of sort of famous. I already did that. I feel pretty unfulfilled. So what is it that I want now? What is the next thing that I want to do? And the answer that's set up in the second verse is, it's this line. It's like, that's your role, the work that stirred your soul, you can make for someone else. And what I mean by that is like, when I think about, Kanye at his best, or Daft Punk at their best, or Bon Iver at their best, like I know in my soul that the world is better for them having released their music. Like, I think if you went into history and scrubbed out my favorite musicians, that the world would be three shades darker. Like, it would just be an objectively shittier place to be. And so, like, I think that's what that's all about. It's like I needed to believe that what I was doing was actually helpful, and that what I was doing is making the world a better place. And so, a line like, isn't it time you get a job? I wanted up and coming musicians to hear that and go, fuck all that noise. Don't succumb to that pressure. What you're doing is, and I feel good saying that because I know what people are doing with music is helping. I know that being making a life out of creativity, although it clearly has its ups and downs, is something that is helping. So that's why, if that seems really obvious or self-evident, there was a time where it wasn't to me.
Hmm.
So
Um, I'm getting some questions over here, and I myself was, curious about the KKB inclusion in that track. Like,
mhm.
what exactly is the origin of that? How did that come about?
Yeah. Maybe around 2019, Gus and Sarah came to my home in North Carolina, and um, we had been talking about collaborating for some time, and they were just such sweet, kind, intelligent, creative people. I was really struck by Gus as a lyricist. He like when we were writing lyrics for the demo that became Musician, and none of those lyrics are used in the final song because I ultimately, like, the way that it worked was we wrote this demo, and that demo is the sample bed for Musician.
Yeah.
Um, so there's not really any really intelligible lyrics except for kind of Sarah saying real or imagined.
Hmm.
But we started trying to write something together, and like, what do you expect a Porter KKB collab to sound like? It would be something really poppy, right? It would be something like maybe hook driven pop thing.
Hmm.
And what we ended up writing was like this like 17th century hymn. Like, no one's heard the verses of that song, but it is very religious sounding. It sounds like a beautiful hymn. Like, the opening is an organ, and the lyrics are all about God. And I remember the three of us just being like, how is this the thing that we ended up producing? And I eventually like sort of ran out of steam for trying to finish that. Like the fact that they weren't in the room anymore, and
Hmm.
it was just really hard to finish the collaboration remotely. So it just sort of sat there for a while. And then yeah, I started cutting up that sample. And then when I put those musician drums behind it, I was like, I just remember being like, I did that thing where I just paced around my room and listened to it 40 times in a row. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like this is something so good. And yeah, like I would love to show more of the original sample one day because I think it has some really special musical moments. And um, but yeah, that's sort of how that came together.
Well, there's also that other sample, I believe, or at least reference to Rob Bass and Easy Rocks It Takes Two on the
Mm,
track, right? Which,
yeah,
I mean, is obviously, I mean, I'm not surprised to hear that track really anywhere these days because it's like that woo
yeah,
like is one of the most widely sampled,
yeah.
pieces of dance music of all time. But is there any significance to your inclusion of that in the track outside of it, being such a popular sample?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the think break is the I mean, there's like four different, I think, versions of the think break that go around. And that's definitely the most popular um like interpolation of that. And I remember I was testing out different percussive loops to lift the second verse because for a verse two, you usually want something that lifts the energy and lifts the mood a little bit, something and also you always want a verse two, I think, to cast a new light on the chorus.
Good songwriting formula right there.
Right, that's something I learned from WikiHow. um and I remember throwing that loop in there. And at that time, I sort of had this idea in my head that I wasn't going to use like the Amen break. I wasn't going to use classic breaks for Nurture because I felt like I did that with Virtual Self, which was so referential to the history of dance music.
Hmm.
And I was like, Nurture is all about like organic drums and stuff like that. But musician, it's almost just like I'm breaking all the rules that I've set up for the album, and I'm just going to have fun with it. Like
Hmm.
I wanted there to be no super saws, which is a prominent trance sound. I wanted to not use like 808 drums because I felt like that was like too dancey. Like I wanted the drum timbres of Nurture to be sort of unidentifiable and like somewhere between acoustic and EDM. And then musician, I just threw all that out the window because I was feeling so like self-confident. And I felt like that, like throwing in the think break with the yeah woo, I was like, if it wasn't a celebration before, it is fully a party now. It's like it's got like this is how I feel like the bass god when I hear the think break. Just something about it that it's just like it's almost like kind of funny. Like, and I felt like that was a really interesting energy for there to be on Nurture. So
Hmm.
I want to get to that place more often as I go into the next record, whatever that may be, whatever form it takes. I want to like not have so many rules next time, maybe, and just
Okay.
just pull the thread of whatever is getting me excited. Because Musician came together that way, and it's my favorite song.
I think that's ultimately like the process that a lot of people sort of find themselves in when they go through maybe like what you were talking about, like this really studious period of like, I need to learn like the foundations of X, Y, and Z. And then as soon as you understand those, it's like, okay, now that I've learned the rules, let's not follow them at all. And let's just
Totally.
like completely break it down.
That's
Um,
so real. It's like this is something that comes up with like the use of loops a lot. New beginner producers, they often begin by just arranging loops, and that's how you first make something that sounds like a musical composition. And then you start to take pride in not using loops, but instead putting together the individual samples yourself. And it's like for the sort of like mid-level producer, I think that becomes a point of pride that you're not relying on someone else's creation. You know how to arrange a snare and have that sit right. Um, and then I think there's this other level where you're like, I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm going to use loops. I'm going to use samples, whatever. And I have no ego attachment to any of it. Like whatever works, works. Like once you're able to get past that point of feeling like you need to prove yourself, I feel like that's fertile grounds for creativity for sure.
Given your love of Kanye, XP Dango wants to know if you could name what would be in your top three as far as his discography goes.
Let's see. Well, I just I don't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
So
Hey,
I'm gonna,
listen, I
yeah,
understand. It's a big discography.
yeah,
It's
yeah. Let
it's a big
me,
question.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna open Spotify here.
Go for it.
Um, Now let's get this right.
Or rate your music. Rate your music is also good. You'll get it all like in front of you really quickly.
Let's see. I don't know about that website.
You know, but
Um,
I,
no,
I,
no,
I see.
I-
No, sorry. I didn't think about. I didn't think about whether or not musicians themselves had opinions on rate your music, which
yeah,
is understandable. Is
yeah.
understandable.
So, let's see. Um, I mean, I'm just such a graduation stan. That album means a ton to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, like graduation lives in that same world as Discovery for me, where
Hmm.
it feels nonstop. It feels colorful. It feels like really, really vibrant. And
Hmm.
like the art direction of it, the fact that there's that little Japanese influence, like almost reminds me of like Interstellar 5555 too,
Yeah.
where it's like this album that's driven by good feelings and has like a sort of soul disco sample and a little bit of a Japanese tie-in as well. So like yeah, let's see. God,
That makes sense. It makes sense.
yeah. Yeah, maybe I don't want to pick a top three. For some reason, to this audience, I can't do it. But like, I can
That's fine. And well,
always,
Chad is already very excited by the fact that you singled out graduation. Everyone's saying
yeah.
that you're very based for that. You're very based and graduation pilled
Man,
for having singled out graduation.
I would love to talk about my favorite Lil B music as well.
Oh, okay.
And I promised myself I would take you to task for giving "I'm Gay" a 0
Well,
as well.
that was out of trolling. That was out of
um,
trolling.
yeah. Okay. Let's see.
But like, I mean, I'm still to this day just like blown away by so many parts of God's Father. I think that's
Mm,
just such like an amazing mixtape.
that's an
It's
incredible tape.
it's an incredible tape.
I think Hoop Life is my favorite like Lil B project. It might be because that was like when I was really getting into his music, but I just feel like it has so many highlights. But the MySpace collection is of course really legendary as well.
And all the
Um,
early Clams stuff, you can't really forget about all the early stuff that he was doing with Clams Casino, or you know, just the stuff that he really kind of started to break with.
it's so crazy how like how much Lil B music there is that is like where it felt like he was rapping on instrumentals that were like light years ahead of what everyone else. It's almost like I think one he's a visionary, but I also think he does so much music that like there's also a bit of a like a sheer volume aspect of that as well. But
Hmm.
just for your listeners, a couple Lil B songs I want to shout out. I would definitely recommend the song Super Saiyan.
Hmm.
He raps over the song Sakura from Dance Dance Revolution Extreme. It's a really interesting experience. Um, there's one from the MySpace collection. Oh my God. Listen to the song "I'm Okay" from the MySpace collection. This beat is actually unbelievable. I need to know who made it. It's like it seriously feels like something from like 2022. And this beat, I think this must have been one that he did like in 2000 like 12 maybe
Hmm.
2013. It's from the MySpace collect, no, earlier, like 2009, like MySpace days. Yeah, the song "I'm Okay" from the MySpace collection, like that beat is so futuristic. And yeah, I don't know if you've Anthony, I don't know if you've heard the Porter Robinson bass freestyle as well,
Oh,
but
I have not.
that's worth your time.
Okay.
Um, yeah, Porter Robinson bass freestyle is awesome. It was my girlfriend got in touch with him over Twitter to be like, I'm wondering if you can do a freestyle for Porter for Christmas. And he was like, yeah, I'd love to. Like, what do you want me to talk about? And he was like, well, Porter really loves your cat Kiki. And he was like, okay, I'll mention Kiki. And he talks about the animals loving him. It's so good. Yeah, yeah. Porter Robinson bass freestyle is very rare.
I'm I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I think you know what you say about the instrumentals is just like such an excellent point. You know, again to sort of like take it to Clams Casino. He was just working with producers that nobody else was, or just deciding to hop on beats that nobody else was. But I think that was a mark of him just like being the genuinely outsider artist that he is. You know, I think he's like, I honestly, I think he's hip hop's most successful outsider artist. I don't think there's going to be another outsider artist as successful as Lil B. You know, somebody who is like genuinely like outside of the commercial loop.
Yeah.
And, you know, to what degree that they are in it, they're completely in it just for themselves and just like, you know, on their own.
It's so interesting though, because I think that like I also think that Lil B is he's a I think he's a capable, very capable rapper and lyricist. Like when Lil B chooses to bar up, he really, really it can. But my favorite work from him is his stream of consciousness stuff, because it's like it's a place I would love to be as an artist. I would love to be able to
both places have their merits and sort of a vibe. You know, as you were just saying, like if you watch his double XL freestyle, like
oh my God,
literally everybody like
everyone's like
I don't think there was anybody in that room who wasn't like familiar with his reputation and like knew that like,
and he goes so crazy on that's one of my favorite videos of all time. Yeah, it's his freshman freestyle, right?
Yeah, he goes much harder than everybody had expected, and he was in the same room as Kendrick at that time.
Yeah, so that's so weird looking back at like that group of people.
It was Kendrick, it was Yellow Wolf. I'm trying to think of who else was in the room, but everybody was just like, oh, he's rapping. Like he's actually like, you know, he's not just like young bass god, blah, 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 blah.
That stuff's good too. I will ride for that.
But it is good.
But
it is good. But the thing is like what people don't understand is that, well, what people didn't understand at the time, like, I think what a lot of people like don't really take into consideration, and this is what is sort of like sad to me a little bit, because you know, it's odd. I went through a period personally of like, you know, appreciating Little B, you know, and like I guess but like being a little annoyed with the fandom sometimes, because like it seemed so rabid that like you couldn't really have like an interesting conversation about it, or like why it was so interesting or why it was so good, or like what made it click or what made it tick necessarily. You know, it was just sort of like, let's just, you know, blindly praise this as much as we possibly can, which, you know, I appreciate the meme of it. You know, I appreciate, you know, sort of like the you know, the repetition of sort of like the joke and how significant that was to sort of like spreading his popularity over the course of that time. But, you know, now that that's like not as strong as it used to be, it's now been sort of replaced by, I think, like a lot of ambivalence. There are a lot of like younger music listeners that have like no fucking idea who Lil B is, or like how or like how radically different he was when he came onto the scene. Because I think a lot of what he did, like a lot of what he did through like 2009 to 2012 has really just like become normalized.
Yeah, it's
like,
so true.
A lot of what he did from that point is now just like the standard. Like, we're just going to riff. We're going to hit you with as many ad libs as possible. We're going to rap on some kooky beats. And essentially, when the song is done, it's going to be more about the energy of it than it's going to be about anything that we said.
Right. And that's something that happens with music a lot, is that the stuff that is formative in the given in the creation of any given trend or sound, or the stuff that predicts the future, can sometimes be hard to appreciate down the line because of the things that were influenced by it. And it's like something that was really formative can be hard to understand or not feel special because people have heard the imitations of it or the refinements of it, even of those ideas. And yeah, sometimes it's really interesting when you find the genesis of something you really like when you discover who your favorite artist's actual inspiration was, and you're like, oh, like this is what it sounded like to them back then. But yeah, I still think Lil B also has the best ad libs in the game, bar none. Like,
no, I agree, you know, but it's, you know, again, but I'm just thinking, it's like, you know, how do you get to a point where, you know, Migos are going world famous off of like Versace, unless before that point you have Ellen DeGeneres, Ellen DeGeneres.
Swat.
I feel like Ellen.
Brang dang dang.
Brang dang. Little, you know, it's I really loved that point when the mainstreaming of Little B when ASAP Rocky was like popping off, and then he sort of like referenced him in that bar on like the his first mixtape where he's like Lil B brang a dang, which is like that's such it's so funny hearing that like brought into the wider world, because like when you just listen to that by yourself and you hear that line for the first time,
Yeah.
and you're just like, it's such a mind-blowing moment, because like you're literally listening to the obliteration of all like conceptual reverence, reverence for like lyrical expectations, lyrical standards, which is not to make the point that like the lyrics are bad. It's merely your reveling in, I'm just going to flip the bird to, the quote unquote standards of what people say I should rap like, or the things that I should say. I shouldn't just throw out. Go on.
Yeah, it's kind of punk to just be willing to do that. And like I think that a lot of music that breaks new ground comes from people who are like completely unself-conscious and
like
are willing to do it wrong.
It's punk, but simultaneously it's so fucking the roots of the genre to begin with, because what is brangadang? What is that if not literally like circling all the way back to the hip, the hibba hibbity,
Oh,
the hibbity,
yeah,
like
true.
what is that
True.
if not just like, it's the same fucking thing. You're just coming up with like rhythmic drivel that's really catchy. That's really catchy and ear grabbing, but you're just doing it in a different context for a new generation. But the thing is, like at that point, people had gotten so far, like their heads so far up their asses with like what lyrics should be. Like hearing that, people were just like, "Oh, that's just silly," Where it's like,
yeah, that's interesting. I had not considered that, about like how that there is a connection to the origins there. Like one thing that I'm always careful to put the asterisk on too is like I'm not like a hip hop guy. Like I'm not a student. I don't know a ton about the origins of like rap or hip hop. I just like I have my obsessions and the things that I follow really closely. But yeah, yeah.
well, I mean, I think that's to sort of your point, because there's something to be said that when Little B was taking off, it was very much with like non-hip hop audiences.
Oh, that's true.
Like it was the hip hop scene that he was getting the most pushback from, that like the older establishment of it at the time, like not just because of his songs and his production and his lyrics, but they'd go crazy in the comments over the fact that he's wearing a purple low cut fucking woman's t-shirt, that he's wearing that he's wearing skinny jeans.
Yeah.
But again, it's he's calling himself a pretty bitch.
Yeah.
But again, it's like, it's funny to think back to that, because it's like all of that sets the groundwork for like a Young Thug. All of that sets the groundwork for any number of other things that, again, like just seem like way less mind blowing now, because it's all just become normalized.
Right. Yeah. I do think that I don't know that much about this again, but I do get the sense that he's respected by so many people that came after him.
Yeah. He is at this point. I think he's been around long enough, and he's like overcome that wave of hate for so long that like, and again, it's like people who've been following for this long understand like the sea change that's happened over the past 10 years, and the degree to which Little B sort of like predicted all of it. And he's definitely way more respected now than he was when he came onto the scene.
I'm happy for him. Yeah. He made a lot of songs I really liked. Like it's there's so much to analyze with Lil B, but like the reality of my experience with it is, if you open up my Spotify or whatever music streaming service, and you just sort by like what artists I actually listen, I just listen to so much of his music. Something about it just like makes me feel, it just makes me like, it's almost aspirational for me. It's like, I wish I could be that vulnerable, like a song like
I think you're letting us in on what the next album process is going to be. I
mean, every interview comes back, I'm going to start rapping.
You heard that soundtrack and you're like, I need to attain this, and now you're just like constantly coming back to this Little B music. And I think there's probably there's an extreme rawness to it that is so raw, it's like euphoric.
Exactly. It's like I feel like there's a part of me that wishes that I could just make something and put it out there and not worry about it. And I spend a lot of time like worrying about it and obsessing over it. And I think that's part of like, I think it's part of the reason my music sounds the way it does, is because I I try to only show like the top, I think like 3% of the things that I kind of make, and I put a lot of time into refining them, and I try to make it exactly to my specification. I try to make it as good as it can be. Um, and like I'm so interested in what it would be like if there was a world where I loosen that filter a little bit more and just release more music, you know. But yeah.
Look, you've been very generous with your time. I don't want to have to steal away any more of it, but I've gotten a few questions here, and I thought this would be a good thing to end on since it's coming up, and I think it's good for people to know and be aware. But uh, the Second Sky Festival that you have coming up, tell us a little bit about when that's happening, the lineup that you have going on, and the artists that you chose in this roster performances seem like very specific. And let me know if like all of them collectively, like sonically, aesthetically, does their sound like represent something for you, like musically speaking?
So I always try to I always try to make the lineups of the events that I curate something like Second Sky. We did it once in 2019. Let me just so I don't forget anyone, look at the lineup of the 2019 festival. So in 2019 we did, it was me, Madion, Kashmir Cat, G Jones, Caro Bonito, Chrome Sparks, Anna Monoguchi, Wednesday Campanella, and Nina Las Vegas. And another interesting thing about it is that it's a single stage festival, and I always open the event myself. I play the first set because I was kind of, one of my main goals for it was I want it to be an opportunity for the people who are playing. I want the people who are playing, like, I want people to really badly desire to play Second Sky because I want it to be such a great chance for people. And so I was like, I feel like if I open the festival and close the festival, then people will really show up early and make sure that everyone is given like their chance to play to the full crowd. And that was just like such a great first year. And my goal with the lineups is it's always like I'm trying to I'm basically trying to take the music that I love most and the music that I actually really listen to that I think my audience would also love and get and enjoy. So like I feel like if you divide up the music that I listen to, and there's like stuff that I think might not be a great fit for my festival, and then there's a slice of stuff that like I think my audience either kind of already does know and would be excited about, or if they don't know, they'll really love it. So the lineup of this year's festival, it's me, Madion again, but he's bringing his live show, Jai Wolf, Toro y Moi, John Hopkins, Jacob Collier, Wave Dash, Nowhere, and Jocho. And somebody did point out that there is a bit of a skew towards like musicianship this year with Jacob Collier and Jocho.
But I think also what Jacob represents is like there seems to like be a bit of a slant toward onlineness,
That's true. That's
because
true.
Collier does have like his very strong online platform as long as well as some of the other musicians that you've chosen too.
Right, right. Yeah, that's true. Like I would consider like John Hopkins to be an artist who's just like so highly respected, especially in the internet like electronic music world. Like people who are fans of electronic music, you'd be really hard pressed to find somebody that doesn't respect John Hopkins to the highest level. But yeah, I like so I mean I feel like I want to talk about Jocho. So Jocho are like they call themselves like a math pop outfit. They're a Japanese band. I really recommend their song "Circle of Life." It's just like really heartfelt, sincere, beautiful. Like it's complex, but the songs are so good. That's the same thing that I would say about Jacob Collier as well. Is like for me, it's not about there's no shortage of evidence that Jacob is insanely talented, but it's not about his proficiency for me. It's about the songs. Like his songs really resonate with me. Like when I saw his performance of Make Me Cry at the NPR Tiny Desk concert, I was like, this is one of the best songs I've ever heard in my entire life. And then I found out that he is really well known for doing like advanced like microtonal crazy polyrhythmic stuff, and all that stuff is really cool to me as well. But I'm like, this guy's songs really move my heart. And so yeah, I think I just with Second Sky, like I want it to be um, a place where like my audience can discover new music or see people they've been hearing about online that like kind of fits in the Porter world. So yeah, I recommend to everyone listening to check out all those artists if you haven't heard them. Although y'all are definitely very knowledgeable and probably know them all already.
All right. Well, listen, man, thank you for coming through and taking the time and just talking with us about everything. This has been a great convo. It's been, I think it's been also like an emotional flush
I'd give you a hug right now, man.
for I and everyone here and you as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, thanks for having me. I'm so happy we did this because I was kind of shitting myself 2 hours ago. I was like, how is this gonna go? I was like, I feel like everyone should know. I didn't know what the Nurture review was gonna be until it came out on Sunday night. So I was like, I'm gonna be talking to this guy. I'm expecting red flannel and a not good. How am I gonna talk to this dude? Like how like is it actually gonna be a cage match? I don't know.
I've had such a crazy week, like moving into this newer space over here,
Yeah.
and like like in any other week where I had nothing else going on,
Yeah.
like I would have just like bopped the review out and just been like, I have the time to process this, I'm just going to do
Yeah.
it now. But like the album was so dense and there were so many like aesthetic and lyrical themes going through it. I had to like, I'm like, I can't process this right now. I'm just like, and I just like, as you said, just barely got it out Sunday night before
Well,
I did
I
the
appreciate you giving it like really giving it time and thinking about it and spending time with it too. I'm so happy you like it. I can't
Yeah,
lie.
I didn't want to just like half-ass the review just to half-ass the review. I mean,
Yeah.
whether it's like condensed together or it's coming over the course of a certain amount of days, like I try to give whatever album I'm doing a formal review of the time that I need to figure out how I feel about it and why. And I felt almost bad doing it as close to the interview as I was, because
That was
like
torture. I was like, what is
by
gonna happen?
by Thursday, I knew what I knew how I felt about it. I just hadn't
Uh-huh.
gotten the chance to shoot the review yet. And just like so many things were coming up and so many things were happening. And I was like, fuck, it's like this review is going to come out like the day before the interview. And it's going to look like, and I'm also just like, concerned about the optics of it, because it's like, I don't want to, sort of just like do a super positive review and then, sort of like have you interview immediately after as if like I said your record was good just to get you on, because like people
Yeah,
coming
we
in
agreed
here.
to this so long ago. And
Yeah.
I do literally Saturday and Sunday, I was like refreshing your page on YouTube. Dude, I know this, I shouldn't admit to this, but I was like, you can't fault me for being like, I'm gonna have a conversation with this person
No,
in front of a bunch of people. Like, what does he think of my album? Like, how is this gonna be? And so, I was like,
no, I agree, because the thing is like, when Reed reached out to me like months ago to have this conversation, I thought it was interesting, just like, because of the fact that of that history and everything. And I was like, what did I just agree to? I don't even know if I'm going to like this guy's next record. What if I hate it? What if I hate it? And I literally just agreed to talk with him, and I, and I gave it a not good.
that would have made for an interesting conversation too.
It would
I think
have.
that would have been the
It would
cage
have
match
also-
everybody was expecting.
It would have
Yeah.
also been an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Either way, it would have been
You-
interesting.
Have you done an interview with anyone who you gave like something in the range of a 0 to a 3?
There have been some interviews in the past where I've reviewed some stuff either negatively or mildly, either like immediately after the interview or a little bit before, or maybe another album came up and I enjoyed that one instead. I mean, there have been interviews, but usually it's with so far it's always been with people who maybe I've covered multiple times, or sort of like understand that like, it's not anything personal. If I don't like a particular record, I'll be there to listen to the next one. And maybe that'll be the one that I like. I don't know. Well, it's always taken in stride usually so far, but hey, if I keep doing this, eventually there's going to be a blow up of it. I did notably fight with Oliver Tree on live before.
Yeah.
Over the
I heard about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard about that. That was funny. But yeah, man, I wish you the best. I have like, it's just been interesting for for me these last couple months, like putting myself in your shoes and thinking about what your role is in this world. And like, I it's weird for me to analyze you to your face, but something that I thought about is that there's probably a generation of young people who think about and engage with music in a completely different way because of you and your work, and they probably listen to more albums and think about it more carefully, and I I think that's something really good. I think it's a really good thing that people like. I have so much gratitude for the fact that people still fucking care about and listen to albums. Like there's no guarantee to me that music listening might not be replaced by something more immediately gratifying. Like there's no there's I don't see a reason why music is something that people are always going to listen to.
Hmm.
I always going to be something that people will listen to. There's so many things that I grew up with taking for granted that have since fallen away. And so like, I don't know, to me, it's a really great thing that there are people who listen to music with a thoughtful ear, and yeah, I think that's probably part of the effect of what you've done, part of the mark you've left on the world for sure. But yeah, thanks
There's
for having
maybe
me,
some
man.
of that, but it's like simultaneously, it's like I'm blown away by the fact that like I see some of these kids who are like following me and following me closely and are turned on to a lot of the stuff that I recommend and, like actually like dig into it. And then, I've been on TikTok a lot lately and there's a pretty robust music community over there. And like, I come across these kids who are doing reviews and stuff or just like doing music based content. And they're already just like complete little experts on stuff that I didn't even know about until I was deep into my 20s. And I'm just
Mm,
like, okay, like I'm just imagining where the fuck you're going to be when you're my age if you keep pursuing it, because it's like, doing what I do is always involved like trying to keep a step ahead or just like always be on the cusp or whatever. And it's like, thanks to just like, not just following what I do, but just like, man, the exposure of the internet in general, because like when, I could speak to the fact that when I was first getting into music, I did have the luxury of at least like, you know, a 96K internet connection and like,
mm,
LimeWire and
yeah,
Kazaa, which was something,
yeah,
which was like more of a window to the music world than some people get.
mm,
And, but now it's like their whole wealths and resources of information that I couldn't even have dreamt of when I was a
yeah,
teenager, that are
yeah,
just like sparking some incredible, I guess, music collections for young people right now. But that's probably for the
mm.
next interview.
Yeah, for sure. We'll leave
Uh,
it there.
Again, thank you for coming through and,
Yeah.
appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thanks.
All right.
Take
Have a good
care.
one. Bye.
Bye bye.